And here's our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you from Beijing on CGTN. I'm Tian Wei. We start today's show with a fast-moving impeachment inquiry into the U.S. president's conduct. The Trump administration ruled out cooperation on the inquiry in a letter to U.S. House Speaker. Mr. Trump is accused of breaking the law by pressuring Ukraine's leader to dig up damaging information on a political rival. New developments and details come out each day, and people wonder whether it would lead to a constitutional deadlock. Take a look.
The fight between the White House and Democrats escalates. A key witness, Gordon Sondland, the U.S. ambassador to the European Union, is set to testify Thursday before Congress. Democrats say Sondland served as an intermediary between President Trump and the Ukrainian president, as the U.S. president allegedly pressed Ukraine for a favor. Mr. Trump wanted his Ukrainian counterpart to investigate possible misconduct by the son of former Vice President Joe Biden, one of Trump's potential rivals in next year's presidential election. Sondland will be testifying in response to a subpoena. He initially declined after U.S. State Department ordered him not to cooperate. Republicans say the hearings are politically biased. Democrats began the impeachment inquiry against the U.S. president last month after a whistleblower complained about a July phone call, while Mr. Trump allegedly pressured the Ukrainian president to investigate Joe Biden's son. Earlier, a former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine told congressional investigators that Trump ousted her based on unfounded and false claims. She was abruptly recalled from Kiev in May. Two foreign-born businessmen with ties to Trump's lawyer were arrested last week, accused of conspiring to bypass federal laws against foreign interference by funneling foreign money to political candidates. Trump has distanced himself from the arrests.
I don't know those gentlemen. Now, it's possible I have a picture with them because I have a picture with everybody. Maybe they were clients of Rudy. You'd have to ask Rudy. I just don't know.
The White House also ruled out cooperating with Congress on the impeachment inquiry. In an 8-page letter sent to Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, White House lawyers questioned the constitutionality, legality, and motives of the inquiry. Congressional investigators insist that it is well within their power to request documents and witnesses, something they are allowed to do, they say, under the U.S. Constitution. How would the impeachment process likely play out?
On the U.S. Congress impeachment inquiry into Trump's conduct, we have an all-American panel. In Chicago, Laura Schwartz, a political commentator who worked at the White House during the Clinton years. In Iowa City, we invited Tim C. Hagel, professor of political science at the University of Iowa. And joining us from Washington, D.C., Robert Moran, a partner with the global advisory firm Brunswick Group. Welcome to the three of you. It's hard for me from outside the United States to catch up with everything that is going on related to the impeachment. I really need your insights desperately to help us understand better. Mr. Schwartz, is this more about partisan rather than a trust about a president?
This is very much about the president conducting business on behalf of the United States by trying to get dirt on a political rival through a foreign country, which is a big no-no here in the United States. It goes against everything the Constitution and the democracy stands for. So I really don't see this as partisan. I see this as policy of the United States. I see this as an infringement of the law. I am looking forward to facts coming out like everybody else, but I think the facts should come out. I don't think we can make a decision right now, but it's not even a he said, she said. The transcript, the memorandum of the call came out, and it confirmed that, yes, this was said, this was asked for, and now they're lining up to see exactly what money may have been held back by from the United States to the Ukraine. And so I really think this is above political and partisan powers at this moment.
Mr. Moran, this would have a lot to do with whether parties that are important in providing information will be able to come out or not, under what circumstances they will be able to do that or not, and what would those, whether yes or no, say to the overall situation, Mr. Moran?
Well, I think, as the prior guest just noted, we have a process for this. And we're going to have an impeachment inquiry moving forward. That would, or that could ultimately move to an impeachment vote in the House. And then if the House does vote to impeach, that then goes to a trial in the Senate. We have quite a bit of public opinion polling in the United States on this, but it's starting to jumble support for impeachment versus removal, which are somewhat separate things. But you know, we've had here in the States a number of surveys come out in the last couple days, including a Fox News survey that showed 51% support for impeachment and removal. The national average for most surveys is about 48–49% support for impeachment and just a little bit less for removal. The challenge, I think, in our political environment is support or opposition to impeachment and removal is heavily partisan, is heavily based on party right now in the public opinion data. But we need, I think we just need to go through the process. We have a Constitution. The Constitution has a process for this. And I think it's good to get the facts out and go through the process. And
I feel good also about inviting Professor Hagel, who is exactly doing his research whole life on about Constitution, U.S. Constitution, of course. So, Professor Hagel, what exactly is the process? What are some of the tumbling blocks we're likely to see for a near future, shall we say, investigation or other processes related to this?
Well, in terms of the Constitution having a process, it does to a very limited extent, meaning that the Constitution doesn't say much about it. It just says that the President or other officers of the United States can be impeached and removed from office. High crimes and misdemeanors is a phrase that's often talked about, but really it's a political process, as most people recognize here, rather than a criminal process. But the two sort of come together in terms of people's perception as to what the process ought to be. And to a certain extent, that means that the process should be open to the extent that it can be, again, assuming that there are no state secrets or national security issues that are involved in the people testifying. But it means that it has to be above board, that both sides should have an opportunity to be heard, to call witnesses and so forth when you're investigating the basis for the impeachment inquiry. And that's one of the things that right now the Republicans are complaining about, that they aren't getting a full access to things, they aren't being allowed to subpoena and all that kind of thing. And so to a certain extent the process is a little bit different this time, because the previous at least two impeachment trials, in Nixon in the 70s, or not trial, but impeachment inquiries, Nixon in the 70s and Clinton in the 90s, that it started with a vote of the House to begin this inquiry, and that didn't happen this time. So that gives something for Republicans to at least complain about, saying that Democrats aren't approaching this in a non-political, nonpartisan manner, which then gives them the opportunity to characterize it as a purely partisan fight.
So, Mr. Moran, if you think about this, what is the most important thing now, knowing the fact that the earlier impeachment inquiries did not lead to impeachment exactly of the president, for example, about Clinton, about Nixon. So will this one more produce a product which would have an impact on political election in your country, or it will have an impact on some other issues? What do you say?
Well, that's a great question. I think American politicians are going to be looking at the political polling very closely. On the Republican side, if the polling starts to continue to build momentum for impeachment and removal, a number of Republican politicians may start to back away from the president, may start to support the process more, and then that could lead to a deterioration of the president's position. Much like what we saw in the Nixon years, where the public opinion during Watergate by 1974, early in 1974, was opposed to impeachment. but then support for impeachment grew to 57% on the eve of the president's resignation. And so I think public opinion is going to be something that Republican politicians most likely look very closely at. The issue here, though, is that the data itself, the people themselves, are polarized. Very few Republican voters support impeachment or removal. A large number of Democratic voters support impeachment and removal. And so how this gets played out is, I think, very important. The prior guest did make a good point, which is that the Republicans are, I think, able to argue to some extent that the process is itself at some level political. And of course, the impeachment process is, to some very real extent, political in the sense that there are political parties and they have other varying views on the topic. So,
Mr. Schwartz, very important topic to you as well, because what would that mean? You know, earlier Mr. Moran talked about the Republicans. Now, whether it's an opportunity for them to stand in different lines, that's a question for them. But what about for the Democrats, since you've been working for the Clinton administration? What would that mean for various candidates? Mr. Biden, for example, whose name is so much related to this one, and others, fate in their chances in a political election, within the party even.
That's a very good point, Tian. I think it really comes down to message strategy. How Joe Biden approaches this after being very quiet the first week that this came out really gave some missed opportunities for his campaign to just simply say, look at this president. He's throwing this out. He can't even focus on an election. He knows I'm a big threat to him. That's why he's doing this. There was no, process found that was poor with my son. It's not the best thing out there, but it was investigated and nothing was found. So let's move on from this. But this just shows how petty our president is and why you need to vote for me to get him out in the next election. That is message strategy. Now, when it comes to Republicans, during the Bob Mueller investigation, which just concluded this last summer, impeachment was thrown around a lot. A witch hunt, the president called it, was thrown around a lot. I think this is different because it's not about the election. It's about a request being made by a foreign government to investigate a domestic political rival. There's a transcript, a memorandum there to support that. There are hearings that are going to be happening. I learned a long time ago, especially during the Clinton impeachment, if you are honest, the truth can't scare you. I think the Trump administration is scared. They don't have an apparatus to fight this just yet. They're putting one together, but it really has been Donald Trump's tweets driving the message. But if they really go at this in a tactical way, they can attack the process, but I think Americans now, the process isn't as much of a part as what's coming out in the process. That's what they're going to be paying attention to, and they need to as well.
Of course, this president is quite a charismatic one. I mean, that would be the adjective I would use to describe the president coming from another country. But at the same time, this is also a president who has been taking great advantage of the presidential power that he has so far, probably arguably more than many of the previous presidents. So would there be a lot of potential, legally speaking, also for this president to explore in terms of being able to protect himself and protect his administration, at least from his perspective?
That's one of the things that many people have criticized President Trump for, is that he's doing a lot of things that as president that perhaps he shouldn't be doing. Maybe Congress should be doing them, or just maybe they shouldn't be done at all. Republicans will fight back on that notion and say, well, wasn't it President Obama who said, well, I have a pen and I have a phone, and basically was willing to exercise executive action when Congress was basically stalled and couldn't do anything because of split control. And so we often see that you have these partisan fights over how much a president can or can't do. What sort of makes the problem worse here is that President Trump doesn't act like a usual politician. That was the case when he was a candidate. It's been the case as president. That upsets many people for a variety of reasons. But it also means that President Trump is perhaps more on the edge than some other presidents are in terms of the things that he does, what he says, what it means, and so forth. And it's very difficult to sort of sort through what's really instance of his abusing his power versus something that's just him being outside the norm in terms of his behavior.
Right. Mr. Moran, what do you make of that barometer, that rather blurred line Professor Hagel just mentioned?
No, I think Professor Hagel is correct. In some basic ways, President Trump has pushed the envelope in two dimensions. The first is using modern communications technology, Twitter, to directly communicate with his supporters and also to really set the agenda of media coverage. The second is just in his behavior. He's pushed the envelope in his behavior, which I think goes beyond or is very different from most Americans' expectations of presidential behavior. And I think these two things have really unsettled the American political landscape over the last several years. But look, we're talking about this process in October, a little over 1 year away from the elections. And when I look at the calendar, it almost feels like we would be better just going into the election and having the people decide at this point. And I think it's a really interesting issue of political strategy for the Democrats. Do they think that this will tie the president down? If they overdo it, does it actually bolster his voting base? It's a really complicated situation, but given the calendar, I wonder if it might not be better to just go straight to the election next fall.
Ms. Schwartz, of course, when it comes to Democrats, you might want to respond a little bit and also have a follow-up question for you, that you see Republicans also from time to time came up and challenged the current president. But as things or other crises came up, it seems that the lines is once again aligned. So what do you make of the future strategies that the Republicans is likely to have as a group also under the current circumstances, particularly in 1 month going into 1 year countdown of the election? Ms. Schwartz.
I was very much against impeachment proceedings for the Bob Mueller investigation. And even at the beginning of this, I wasn't quite sure if it's something the Democrats should move ahead with, because I really believe their target needs to be taking down Donald Trump at the polls on Election Day in just over a year. And I don't think going through an impeachment proceeding is going to help bolster their chances. In fact, I think it's quite a negative. Now, that was when it was the Bob Mueller investigation, and it just wasn't easy enough for the American public to understand. When this came through, much more easy to understand. You see the polling numbers that Mr. Moran was talking about. The public has moved both on whether or not we should have proceedings and whether or not the president should be removed. And so I think it was imperative to the election of next year that the Democrats could not let this go, and Nancy Pelosi, reluctant, came around to impeachment proceedings, because, and they would behoove themselves to again state this is beyond politics. This is about the democracy of the United States and a sitting president asking and possibly withholding funding from another foreign country to dig up political dirt on a domestic candidate. If proven, that is wrong, and that is impeachable. Whether or not he gets impeached by the Senate, I think that they probably will acquit him, but I think there's going to be some fractures and some breaks in the party along the way.
As I said at the very beginning of our discussion, ladies and gentlemen, this is very confusing to someone from outside your country. I guess for me, maybe even inside your country, you have to follow up every day in order to catch up with what exactly is going on. But, you know, this is a legitimate question, I guess, for all of us from the rest of the world to ask. Professor Hagel, I would throw that difficult question to you. How should we understand this process and be able to, you know, understand the politics vis-a-vis all the decisions that the United States and Washington now has to make as an important power of the world? You know, here in China, in Asia, or in the rest of the world, there seems to be a lot of things going on which the U.S. has to play a role, and now we do not know what's going to be next.
That's exactly right. It presents an element of uncertainty into the United States' role in world affairs, but it also does for those of us in the United States as well that's just not entirely sure how this is going to come out. That there are some that believe very strongly that the president should be impeached and removed, and others believe very strongly it shouldn't. Some believe it's a highly partisan affair, political theater. Others believe the opposite. And it's just not clear as to how it's going to resolve itself. And that bit of uncertainty does provide problems for the United States in terms of putting together agreements of various sorts with other nations and how we proceed and work forward. And it's just not clear how that's going to work out until we actually either have some resolution as far as the impeachment side of things goes, but also in terms of the election next year. And to a certain extent, perhaps the impeachment is intended as a way to diminish the possibility that President Trump gets reelected. If that's the case, then we'll see how that turns out as well. But either way, again, it just provides that uncertainty, which makes it very difficult for the United States to act as that world actor, or that actor on the world stage.
One of the things we know, at least given the experiences of the earlier so-called impeachment inquiries in the U.S., is the uncertainties related to all parties. We do not know what kind of dirt is likely to be digged out at what time, about whom. So very complicated, I would say, hard to keep up with. But Mr. Moran, what do you think for the rest of the world? How should we watch this and see what's next?
So I would recommend taking a historical perspective. The Founding Fathers had a dilemma. On one hand, they wanted a representative democracy where we could elect our leaders. On the other hand, they were worried about individuals abusing that power, and they understood that no one should be above the law. So they had to come up with an emergency clause that could be enacted, that could be used to solve this dilemma. And that's why they created this. And it's a testament, if you think about it, to their wisdom. And a testament to the duration of the United States. We've been at this for a couple hundred years, and we've used this process several times.
Mr. Moran, I love your positive thinking, but we'll see whether it's that logic. Ms. Schwartz, same question to you, I guess. What about the rest of the world? How should we watch this?
He should be making positive choices for policy, showing that America continues to be a strength in the world, not make any rash decisions that his own party is against. So it's very troubling to me, because we are, as a country, strong, and we want to be allied with nations around the world and play a part in this incredible global interdependent community that we are in. It's an unfortunate reflection right now.
I know there's a lot of adjectives in your answer, Mr. Schwartz. For now, I want to thank the three of you for joining us and helping us to understand really what is behind and what's likely to be ahead. Very important for all of us. Laura Schwartz, Timothy Hagel, Robert Moran, really appreciate it. Thank you.